Hello, welcome back to The Sower, a podcast of the Ciceronian Society. We publish weekly in audio on all platforms and in video on our YouTube channel. So if you're listening right now, please go over to our YouTube channel for a video version of this episode. To learn more about our programming, please visit ciceroniansociety.org. This episode of The Sower is a recording of a plenary panel from our March 2026 annual conference in Omaha, Nebraska. This panel is the awarding of the Herbert J. Storing Prize. The Storing Prize was founded by the Ciceronian Society in partnership with the Maibach Fund. It is awarded every year to the author of a published book-length project in any academic discipline, focusing upon topics related to the American founding era. The winner of this year's Storing Prize is Jane Calvert, the founding director and chief editor of the John Dickinson Project, for her book, Penman of the Founding, A Life of John Dickinson. I'll just mention, parenthetically, that as I'm recording this introduction, you can purchase a hardback copy of Penman of the Founding on Amazon for under $15. I highly recommend that you do so. I know that after listening to this video, you certainly will want to read her work. The first person to speak will be Ciceronian Society Executive Director Joshua Bowman. As this is the first evening plenary panel of the conference, he will begin by welcoming all of the conference attendees to Omaha. After Josh, we will hear from Michael Maibach, who helped to found this prize and is a former student of Professor Storing. He'll share some information and stories about Herbert J. Storing and his legacy and the life that this prize is meant to honor. Then we will hear from James Patterson, president of the Ciceronian Society, who will award the prize to Jane Calvert. The two of them will then conduct an interview and Q&A about her work and about John Dickinson in general. Here's the panel. Enjoy.
So good evening and welcome to the 2026 Ciceronian Society Conference. Hold your applause, remain seated. For those who just joined a little later, I'm Josh Bowman, Executive Director of the Ciceronian Society. It is my privilege to welcome you to Omaha, Nebraska, the Big O, the Silicon Prairie. Yeah, that's right. Give it up for Omaha. Let's do it. Absolutely. It does get that applause every year for the Little League World Series, but not usually in March. College World Series. I'm sorry. What am I doing here? Little League. I'm sorry. My apologies, everyone in Pennsylvania, except for Bill. So the nicknames I looked up: the Big O, the Silicon Prairie. That's a new one. Or my favorite, the Gateway to the West. I've received no shortage of funny looks from friends who asked me some rendition of, "Why the heck are you going to Omaha?" Or, "I didn't know Warren Buffett was a donor." Yeah, I wish, but he's not. But Nebraska is the least visited of all 50 states. Why Omaha? Well, since we're unexpectedly meeting in the kinetic phase of a not war, and we are quite close to some missile silos, I can say at least that in a nuclear conflict, it would probably be over for us really quickly. You're welcome. And the other simple answer is that Michael Thomas and the Menard Center were so generous and helpful. It just made sense. But I think we've come to see it as more than a matter of expediency. That nickname, Gateway to the West, for one, is quite appropriate. Though we, of course, refer to the Western tradition, the Ciceronian Society is unapologetic in its affection for the West, and we want to be a gateway to that tradition ourselves, and especially to those corners of the tradition neglected by similar organizations. James, did you mess up my notes? Okay, thank you. The tradition, thank you, James. The tradition is rooted in our classical and Christian past, and we're not ashamed of that. To be sure, in the spirit of the Lenten season, we are well aware of the sins of our ancestors, not to mention our own faults, which are legion, but we see in that same tradition an overabundance of reasons to be grateful for our rich inheritance of wisdom and sacrifice. After selecting Omaha, I also learned that atop the dome of the State House in Lincoln, Nebraska, is a statue of the Sower by Lee Laurie. The parable and image of the sower has long been central to our identity as an organization. Beyond our agrarian and localist sympathies, which are certainly here, we want to become the kind of soil in which the true, the good, and the beautiful are planted. As educators and writers, we also recognize our role in cultivating that soil in others through friendship, prayer, and teaching. And in that spirit of sowing, we are looking to do 2 new things this year that I'm really excited to tell you about. Number 1, we're going to hold our first ever fall symposium. This will be a smaller, focused event that is more intentionally public-facing to share the Ciceronian Society's insights with a broader audience and sow the seeds of a more nuanced conversation. Our topic this year is, quote, Scholars and Educators in a Brave New World. And I encourage you to look over the call for papers, which is on the table, and also online. In the most basic sense, our focus is not simply on the many crises faced in higher education today, but also on what we're doing and what we can do about it. Stop complaining. How are we going to respond in a way that responds to the troubles that we see? What are some interesting and innovative ways in which we might persist in intellectual discipleship and scholarship? What needs to be discarded? What needs to be recovered? How might we go about achieving deeper, lifelong intellectual and moral formation, not only on our campuses, but in our churches and in our communities? What importance does a sense of place have for the modern scholar and educator? We'll hear a good example of this from our friends, by the way, at Christian Halls International tomorrow during lunch. But those questions give you a sense of what we're looking for. And any individual or organization can propose a paper or a session, and those will be due June 1st. The symposium itself will take place October 22nd to the 24th in Holland, Michigan, the town I currently call home. It's a beautiful place to visit that time of year, and I look forward to sharing that with many of you. And I also would say this has been a long time coming. We've been wanting to do a fall event forever. So many of you will say at the end of this event in years past, like, I don't want to wait a whole year to see these people again. These are the kind of people I wish were teaching my kids, that I wish were in my church, that I wish lived near me. And I think that says a lot about us as a society. This fall, we're also launching a very ambitious certificate program called the Logres Institute for Classical Liberal Studies. Logres, for those who were not in the earlier panel and who don't know, is the mythical name for the area of Britain ruled by King Arthur. In C.S. Lewis's book, That Hideous Strength, the community dedicated to defending human ways of living against encroaching inhuman modernity is called Logres. The Institute is dedicated to preserving the liberal arts and locating those arts at the center of the classical renewal movement. I don't think I need to tell this crowd that classical education is growing exponentially. And when the Ciceronian Society started in 2012, it was barely on our radar. It wasn't on my radar at all. But after COVID, the classical movement exploded. Many of its leaders then found us and our conference, and like many of you, they showed up and said, "We found our people." And we responded in turn with some version of, "Where have you been all our lives?" What many in classical education also discovered is that they're trying really hard to give younger generations an education they never had themselves. These teachers recognize that they lack critical content knowledge and an experience of engaging in the difficult texts they're responsible for teaching. These are educators who want to become deeper wells from which their students can draw wisdom and inspiration. Many of these teachers, though, have neither the time nor the money to go back to college to make up for that intellectual deficit. And let's be honest. With the exception of several programs represented here tonight, do our colleges and universities really prepare people to teach classical ed? No, we know that, right? So what we're going to do is offer synchronous online certificate programs led by quality teachers with experience in classical education and who possess the content knowledge to deepen that well for the classroom. We will be aiming initially at those already within classical education or just starting out who want to strengthen their own background in the topics that we offer. Courses will meet every other week, every other week, 5 times across 10 weeks. And each certificate will require 8 courses. Each course will require students to read 2 to 4 books and discuss those books in seminars led by a Ciceronian Society instructor. This program will be a way of helping teachers cultivate habits that lead to the good intellectual life, reading, discussing, and writing in community. It is our hope that as the program grows, we'll be able to expand our offerings to additional courses and certificates to help those involved in the intellectual discipleship of churches and local communities. And in true Ciceronian fashion, we hope to add in-person elements over time. Finally, I would also love for this someday to be an opportunity for our members as a side gig, teaching subjects they love to people who actually want to learn it. and who actually do the readings. Imagine that. Beginning July 1st of this year, the Logos Institute will be run by Dr. Josh Herring. Where are you at? Over there. And I encourage you to reach out to him and Lisa Wirtz. Where are you at, Lisa? There you are. Thank you, Lisa. If you have any questions about this or any ideas you want to participate, please let them know. We'll be sharing more throughout the year and as we look to recruit students for our first term. And please help us spread the word about the Fall Symposium and Logos. It is a massive help to us, the word of mouth. That's how most of you are here, right? And far more effective than spending a marketing budget, which we do not have. The Fall Symposium and Logos are, in part, our modest response to the deep intellectual, cultural, and spiritual crises of our time. Crises that cannot be resolved through elections and policy, important though those are, and it certainly cannot be solved by war. At times, these crises, which I'm being deliberately vague about, seems to be so overwhelming. There's so much suffering in the world, we can wonder what we're even doing here. Is it self-indulgent, even sinful to be a scholar in such a moment? If World War III is just one false move, one deep fake AI video, one tweet, or one Epstein file away, is this whole event just a farce of navel-gazing and escapism? These questions remind me of C.S. Lewis's essay, Learning in Wartime, where he writes in the midst of World War II, he says, quote, "Human life has always been lived on the edge of a precipice. Human culture has always had to exist under the shadow of something infinitely more important than itself. If men had postponed the search for knowledge and beauty until they were secure, the search would never have begun. We are mistaken when we compare war with normal life. Life has never been normal. Even those periods which we think most tranquil turn out, on closer inspection, to be full of crises, alarms, difficulties, emergencies. Plausible reasons have never been lacking for putting off all merely cultural activities until some imminent danger has been averted or some crying injustice put right. But humanity long ago chose to neglect those plausible reasons. They wanted knowledge and beauty now and would not wait for the suitable moment that never comes." End quote. Lewis's encouragement is especially true today, when the struggle to just hold on to our humanity has become so urgent. Dystopian novels like 1984, Brave New World, and especially That Hideous Strength, have become alarmingly prophetic. We rage against the dehumanizing forces of modern totalitarianism, Gnosticism, and nihilism, in part by keeping the light of the Western tradition burning. I know it seems futile at times, but your reading, teaching, and writing is as much a spiritual resistance as it is an intellectual one. It is also a defiant act of hope against mindless despair. Remember, Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. That's the biggest difference between Orwell and Huxley's view and that of C.S. Lewis. The darkness will not and cannot win. So we are not keeping alive the writings of Aristotle, Augustine, Cicero, and Dante out of mere self-interest. We're not just entertaining ourselves with Tolkien and Shakespeare, Pascal and Samuel Johnson. We are taking a stand for the reality of truth, goodness, and beauty, a reality we did not will into existence. We are saying that virtue is not something we signal for our own self-righteousness, but something we can know, pursue, and live by. And as Christians, we're also giving our scholarship and teaching to Christ, recognizing that it is only by His grace we can learn and share any of this. So let us love the Lord our God and one another with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Let us face the time given to us with courage and conviction of a saved people, knowing our Redeemer lives, and in the hope of His glorious return. Amen? One friend who has been so generous in keeping those fires of Western civilization alive, and especially as it relates to the American founding, is Mr. Michael Maibach. He was a student of Herbert J. Storing, and it's in his late professor's honor that this award is being given. Please join me in welcoming Michael Maibach to the podium.
Good evening. We're so grateful, Josh. We are a society because of your 24/7 work for us, and we do appreciate it. Please, thank Josh. Our society speaks of the divine, and I know something about that because I put myself through college, and I went to Northern Illinois University, and my freshman year was the fall of 1969, which is when Herbert Storing started to teach one class every semester in addition to his class load at University of Chicago, because he had lots of children and he was making extra money out in DeKalb, Illinois, where they invented barbed wire. I finished my master's degree in 1975, and 2 years later he passed away. He only taught the 6 years that I attended, and I took him every semester, 12 classes in 6 years, and then I walked him to his car every night after class, one day a week, and asked him questions that I didn't have time enough to ask in the course. So, Mr. Storey's 7-volume Anti-Federalist is a major and lasting civic contribution. He saw that their intellectual challenges against the Federalists made the Founding Fathers develop stronger arguments and think more deeply, and they give us warnings for our own day, the Anti-Federalists. He wrote about blacks in America and felt they saw our republic very uniquely because of their history. They had to be convinced to buy into the Constitution in the ways that many did not have to be. He was for common good over competing goods. He was for political judgment over technocratic government, unlike Woodrow Wilson. He believed that presidential leadership required both political judgment and administrative talent. Energy was vital in the executive. In other words, what you do and how you do it are both important. He believed that presidents must lead public opinion as well as follow it, just as Lincoln did. As we know, he was a leading scholar of the American founding. He revised the serious study of the U.S. Constitution, as others did, and the American founding. Prior to Mr. Storey and others from Chicago and other places, political scientists had seen the Founding Fathers in the rearview mirror as historicisms, contextualization, not important. We weren't going to learn from them because they're frozen in their own time with their own views that were all irrelevant to today. We see this in Charles Beard's Economic History of the Constitution, saying that the Founding Fathers really used their financial interest to fashion this republic and not some more grand ideas about the human condition, which was a slander. Mr. Storey held that the founders could teach us today about issues of our day. He engaged them on their own terms with their own thoughts. When we read the Federalist paper, we had to understand what they were saying to us now. In 1977, he was on a panel at the American Association of Political Science. Is that what it's called? APSA? Yes. The first three panelists, it was about the Constitution, the first three panelists held that the founders were passé, that no one really cared about what they thought anymore. What was only important was what the current Supreme Court thought the Constitution said. So when Mr. Storey got to the microphone, he was larger and had a deeper voice than myself. He said, "Well, I care," which woke them all up. And then he went on to say why reading the founders was still important to understanding our Constitution today. That's the kind of fellow he was. July 1977, he and Martin Diamond, another professor of mine, testified in favor of the Electoral College before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And after that testimony, Mr. Diamond had a heart attack and died in the committee floor with Birch Bayh trying to help him as he died from a heart attack. 4 months later, Mr. Storey died, and so we lost them both, those two great scholars, that year. Joseph Cropsey at University of Chicago said of Mr. Storey, his logic strengthened his thoughts without hardening his heart. He taught his students the difference between sentiment and sentimentality. This award is meant to keep alive attention to Mr. Storey's scholarship, and especially to the importance of the period in history we're going to honor, which is between the 1754 Albany Plan and the James Monroe Presidency. Those are the books we look at, so that people are writing about that period that so informed what we're doing today as scholars. Thank you.
So for those of you who don't know, I'm James Patterson, president of the Ciceronian Society, and Josh handed me this, so I'm going to read it. The Ciceronian Society, in partnership with the Maibach Fund, is proud to award the second Herbert J. Storing Book Prize on American Federalism and Natural Law. This prize recognizes books of exceptional scholarly quality that focus on the ideas of the American founders, as Michael just indicated. Herbert J. Storing was an American political scientist from Ames, Iowa, best known for reviving the serious study of the American founding. He was a well-loved and influential teacher at the University of Chicago and had just started at the University of Virginia when he passed away suddenly at the age of 49. This prize annually awards the author of a published book-length topic project from any academic discipline. The focus of the book should address topics related to the American founding era. Winning works will be distinguished by their scholarly quality and their attention to the American Republican tradition of self-government, federalism, natural law, virtue, liberty, and statesmanship. For the 2027 award, we are accepting nominations for books published from July 1st, 2024 through July 1st, 2026. Nominations are due by September 1st, 2026. And you should have a QR code on your table where you can learn more about Dr. Storing, this award, and make the nomination if you so choose. And tonight, we'll be interviewing this year's winner, Jane E. Calvert, for her brilliant biography of John Dickinson, Penman of the Founding. Here's a copy up here. Dr. Jane E. Calvert is the founding director and chief editor of the John Dickinson Project. She is also the foremost Dickinson scholar, having worked on him for over 2 decades. Her book, Quaker Constitutionalism and the Political Thought of John Dickinson, was the first work to give a comprehensive explanation of his thought, action, and contribution to the founding of America. She has taught at St. Mary's College of Maryland, the University of Kentucky, and Yale University. Her research has been sponsored by institutions around the country, including the Newberry Library, the Huntington Library, the American Philosophical Society, the Library of Company of Philadelphia, and the David Library of American Revolution, to name just a few. Dr. Calvert speaks to academic and public audiences around the country on Dickinson and issues related to the American founding. She is a member of the Association for Documentary Editing and a 2010 graduate of the Editing Institute sponsored by the National Historic Preservation and Records Commission of the Wisconsin Historical Society. Wow. We are honored to award Dr. Calvert the Herbert J. Storing Prize for her widely celebrated biography of John Dickinson. Thank you. Come on up. So you are the world's foremost scholar on John Dickinson, but why him? What drew you to him as a subject?
I attended a Quaker college in Indiana, and when I started there, I knew nothing about Quakers, and when I finished, I didn't know much more about Quakers, and I didn't particularly have a great experience there. It was sort of at the first wave of political correctness, and I found my classmates, I found them to be illiberal and intolerant, and so I left there and went my first job after college was the Hudson Institute, so sort of from one extreme to the other. And the questions that I had about American politics and civic engagement, and also my father, who was a political theory professor, it really made me want to go to graduate school, where I really kind of discovered Quakerism for the first time. And the more I researched, the more I found them interesting, and I also realized that 17th century Quakers were even more annoying than 20th century Quakers, and they were kind of everywhere all the time, and their influence was disproportionate to their numbers. And so I became really intrigued with them, and I had no intention of studying the founding, the revolution, and certainly not a founder. I didn't think I had anything to contribute. But really all roads kind of led to the revolution, and I found that his name kept coming up in stuff about Quakers. And so I was wondering who this person was, and the more I tried to find out, there just wasn't anything, or what I found about him was very confused. And the biggest question seemed to be, was he or was he not a Quaker? And by that point, I had started attending meeting, and I really admired a lot about the Quakers, but I had no intention of becoming one. And I recognized that in him. And he was raised a Quaker and shared many of the Quakers' beliefs and values. And his closest friends at the end of his life thought he was a Quaker, and yet he would never become a Quaker. He made that very clear. And so I thought, well, I can relate to that, and so I thought about him in those terms, and I realized I should explain what I saw there. And so it started with the first monograph, and then I realized as I was finishing that up, he wrote so much that nobody had any idea about. And I thought someone ought to collect these papers and publish them, because no one had done that for him. And then I was like, oh, I think that has to be me. And I didn't want to be a documentary editor. It's really hard. It's much harder than being just a historian. And but then that's how that started.
So John Dickinson was very attached to his home. He was from Delaware, right? And what were some aspects of his early life that you find most important for our audience to know?
Well, so he was born in Maryland, and then when he was about 7 or 8, his family moved to one of the 3 lower counties of Pennsylvania, which we now call Delaware. It was those 3 counties were just the lower counties of Pennsylvania, owned by the Penn family, and he spent his early career going back and forth and serving both colonies and then later serving both states. But he was indeed very attached to his home in Delaware in particular, but also America. And I think I'll say that he really realized his attachment very deeply when he went to London to be trained in the law. And while he was over there, unlike other founders who went over and really liked France or England and thought they might just stay there forever, Dickinson was deeply homesick, and it was there he discovered his patriotism. And London was great. I mean, he was literally moving in the upper echelons of society. He went to the king's birthday party, okay, and he was rubbing elbows with the aristocracy, but he missed the wilds of America, and he said, it's rude, but it's wholesome, and he found Americans to be, or he thought of Americans as virtuous and industrious, and he learned these lessons from his parents. He was deeply attached to his parents. He had a wonderful relationship with both his father and his mother, and he learned law and business and property management from his father, and literature and the Bible from his mother, and they were role models for him, and so I think he really just imbibed the land of his birth and its virtues and the virtues of his parents very deeply.
See, you mentioned he went to London. I think it was Middle Temple. Took the bar. What kind of education did he receive? It sounded like when looking at his life, it was something that we kind of aspire to restore and preserve here.
Well, so like most gentlemen's sons, he was educated at home, first by his parents and then by tutors. And his younger brother did go to a Latin school, but there wasn't one, nearby that John went to. And then he went to Philadelphia first to read law with a former king's attorney, and it was there he passed the bar. And then he went for further legal training at the Middle Temple, where he was going to become a solicitor, but he ended up becoming a barrister because his skills were such. And so, I think he said to his parents in particular, as he was in London and he was looking at the sons of gentlemen from other American colonies, and how out of place they seemed, and he attributed to his comfort and his being able to navigate that world and do much better than these sons of gentlemen from other colonies. He attributed it to two things. One was the liberal education his parents gave him, and that was the main thing, and that although his family owned enslaved black people, he was not raised the way the other sons of slave owners were raised, and the way he described it, that they were, sycophantic to those above them on the social hierarchy and tyrants to those below them, and the little masters would, beat the black children who served them for serving them too slowly or in the wrong way, and he said a liberal education is, and he said this throughout his life, is the best way to prevent slavery of every kind. And so we are in a deep crisis in this country about civic education and liberal arts education. It's lost its purpose, which was, and in Dickinson's mind was, and for most of our history was, a deeply civic education, and that was my reason for getting my PhD, following in my father's footsteps.
So tell me a little bit about the religion of the Quakers, and how do they worship, and how did their ideas influence Dickinson, even if he ultimately never took the final step to really join them?
So Quakers were dissenters from the Church of England, and they were by far the most persecuted of dissenters. And what was so kind of terrifying to members of the Church of England was that Quakers believed in what they called the light within, God's light within. And interestingly, they saw Quakers very much like Catholics, and they called the light within the Pope within. And what they were afraid of was that Quakers would have allegiance to this Pope within instead of the King, and so and Quakers seemed to confirm all their worst fears by subverting traditional norms, social norms, and political norms, and they saw all individuals, by virtue of the potential for accessing the light. They didn't say that everybody had the light, but everyone could find the light. And that made everybody spiritually equal. And so they would refuse to do things like doff their caps to social superiors or bow. They would use the plain language, thee and thou, instead of so the informal singular instead of the formal plural you. Even to the king, they would say thee and thou to the king and refuse to bow or doff the caps. So they got themselves into trouble for doing things like that, and they were really brutalized. They were beaten and whipped, and they had their tongues tongues bored through with hot irons, and they were thrown into prison. And this was, it happened to men, women, pregnant women, old men, everybody. And yet they, believed that they came to believe, they didn't initially believe, that God's creations were sacred and they ought not to be destroyed, and that applied to other men, but also the Constitution, which was ordained by God. And so they did not believe in violence, and they invented the theory and practice of civil disobedience in the 1660s. And they used it to secure religious liberty for themselves and other dissenters. And so Dickinson, he subscribed to all of these things. And it's also what caused Quakers to be the first abolitionists and the first advocates for women's rights, because eventually spiritual equality becomes civil equality. And so Dickinson agreed with all of these things and really sought to uphold them. The main place he disagreed with Quakers was in that he believed in what he called the lawfulness of defensive war. So that a people, not individuals necessarily, but a people has a right to defend itself with arms if it's attacked. And so that's what really the main thing that prevented him from uniting with Friends.
There's even some fingerprints of Quaker ideas in the Constitution, right? Like oath or affirmation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
Was that for Dickinson?
Well, by then, other leading founders had realized that this was an important provision, and Jefferson had recognized the persecution of the Quakers. So I don't think Dickinson actually had. Although, it's a good point, because in his 1776 draft of the Articles of Confederation, he wrote in a religious liberty clause, and it included gender inclusive language to protect women's religious liberty and women's freedom of public speech, and it was excised. Americans were not ready for religious liberty in 1776.
So, what does the phrase "trimmer" mean when treating him in your text?
So trimmer, it's a nautical term, and it was used in a political context, and it could mean one of two things. It could either mean, in a derogatory sense, a political opportunist, someone who would trim the sails to go with the prevailing wind. That was an insult. But it could also mean the person who shifted the ballast in the hold of the ship to keep the ship from listing too far to the left or too far to the right, keep it on a true course towards liberty, or towards whatever the goal was. And for Dickinson, that was liberty. So Dickinson was very much that principled trimmer who shifts his weight, and when he became very well known and people wanted him on their side, he would subtly shift his weight one way or the other to get the results that he wanted, and it was a very powerful position, but it also meant that very powerful individual, if whoever he doesn't side with gets attacked. And so it was someone who had to be very, very strongly principled in order to hold the course.
So, if a lot of people, if they're going to know something about Dickinson, are going to know him for letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania. So tell us a little bit about what he's trying to do in those letters and maybe how they influenced the Revolution.
So, so Dickinson had played a major role in the Stamp Act resistance. He was the sort of nominal leader of the Stamp Act Congress and wrote both of the documents it produced. And then he also wrote several public documents, including the first advice to ordinary Americans on how to resist peacefully. It's the first American statement of civil disobedience. He published that in 1765, and then the Stamp Act was repealed, which was a great victory. But then the Parliament, at the same time it repealed the Stamp Act, it passed the Declaratory Act, which said that Parliament could legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. And then the next year, in 1767, it started passing the Townshend Acts. And those were at least as bad as the Stamp Act, maybe worse. They taxed all kinds of basic necessities, lead paint and tea and glass and things that the colonists were prohibited from manufacturing themselves. So they were really going to be a captive audience. And Dickinson kind of looked around and waited for someone to protest, but no one was really paying attention, and nobody was really voicing any opposition to these very dangerous acts. So after he waited a while, nobody said anything. He wrote these letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania, and he published them over 12 letters from beginning of December through the end of February. And his goal in writing those was there were several goals. He wanted to raise awareness about the injustice of the acts. He wanted to reframe the debate away from internal taxation versus external taxation, which didn't make any sense, to the intent of the taxation. But then also, he wanted to urge Americans to do several things. The first and most important was to see themselves as Americans. Americans at this point, they saw themselves as Britons. They were British subjects. They did not see themselves as Americans. They saw themselves as living in whatever colony. And these colonies were only related to each other through Britain. They were even waged war against each other. They were hostile in a lot of cases. So he wanted Americans to see themselves as Americans. And then he described what an American was about. And Americans had many, many good qualities. And he urged them that the patriotic way of resisting was through peaceful constitutional means, and he knew that they knew what he meant, which was civil disobedience and other means like withholding. Using the powers of the purse that the legislatures had to, withhold the advantages that Parliament was used to receiving from the colonies. And so it was really to educate the American populace on these various issues and to get them to act. It was an amazing effort at civic education.
Who was Joseph Galloway, and why did Dickinson want to duel him?
Yeah. So Joseph Galloway, he was a putz.
Clip that. That was great.
he was really kind of an odious character. He and Dickinson had been having very pointed run-ins since 1758, when Dickinson defended the Reverend William Smith against bogus charges of libel by the Pennsylvania Assembly. And Galloway was deeply jealous of Dickinson. He had been sort of, the kind of star of the bar, of the Pennsylvania bar. And Dickinson had just returned from his education or his training in London and was quickly overshadowing Joseph Galloway, and they were the same age, but Galloway was really kind of vicious and made fun of Dickinson's appearance and was just insufferable. And so then they ended up serving together in the legislature, and Dickinson, they again went head to head when Joseph Galloway and Benjamin Franklin tried to have the Pennsylvania Constitution abolished, to try to stick it to the proprietors, but Dickinson didn't want it abolished because it protected the Quakers' religious liberty, and he says that we have no reason to expect that the Crown would protect religious liberty. Why would the Crown give Quakers more liberty in Pennsylvania than people in England have? And so he defeated Galloway and Franklin and basically got them tossed out of office. And so, but in the course of that very acrimonious political debate, I don't know exactly what was said. That wasn't recorded. But I think Galloway must have said something really obnoxious and provocative. And Dickinson, he was young, he was passionate, and he just lost his cool. And a fist fight ensued. And Galloway might have grabbed for his prominent nose. And then Dickinson just entirely lost his composure and challenged Galloway to a duel. And I think he really regretted that because the pamphlets are just kind of embarrassing. They're funny, they're hilarious, but they're not really dignified. And Dickinson never again, even to his worst enemy, John Adams, ever stooped to that level. He learned his lesson. But Galloway Galloway kind of exacted retribution on Dickinson for the remainder of Galloway's time in America before he turned loyalist and fled the colony.
Speaking of Adams, another funny-looking founder, they got into it during the First Continental Congress. What's the story there?
Well, actually, in the first Congress, they didn't get into it.
Oops.
No. It's a fair mistake because Galloway had kept Dickinson out of the first Congress until the very end, and then Dickinson slipped in. But Dickinson was nevertheless the guiding force of the first Congress, and he wrote 4 of the 6 documents that it produced. But when he joined belatedly, Adams thought that he was going to be the main draftsman for some of these documents. And then when Dickinson slipped in and Congress threw out Adams' productions and adopted Dickinson's, Adams started grumbling. And so Adams had been, well, my students used to call Adams, he's totally Dickinson's fangirl. I mean, just really, gushing about Dickinson in his diary and, the farmer this and Dickinson that. But then when Dickinson stole his thunder, he started grumbling. And then kind of, Adams, he stewed about it until the second Congress. And that's where, well, even then they didn't actually have a real run-in. And it's complicated. I'll kind of keep it brief. But, basically, again, Dickinson was the leader of this Congress, and he put forth a plan that Congress adopted for how to try to, negotiate and, reconcile with Britain. And Congress went along with this, and everyone was satisfied. But then Adams became really disgruntled, not just at Dickinson's success, but also about his fellow Massachusetts delegates, with whom he was very impatient, and they weren't doing things the way he wanted them to do them. And he also was, Adams was ill. He felt really miserable for most of that Congress, and he wasn't able to see, and he was sick. So at a point, he just kind of let loose. He wasn't really, wasn't ever really known for keeping his cool. And he wrote a couple of letters, one of which was intercepted and published by the British, and it called Dickinson, "A certain great fortune and piddling genius is giving a silly cast to all of our doings in Congress." And that was, intercepted, published by the British, and it was a terrible insult. And Dickinson was completely dismayed because, to his face, Adams and all the Massachusetts delegates had been very, very friendly, and he understood that even though they differed on certain opinions, they respected one another, and they would be manly and say things to each other's faces. And here Adams was going behind Dickinson's back, and as it turned out, it kind of backfired for Adams because the whole of Congress united behind Dickinson, of course, and so, but that was the end of any friendly relationship that Adams and Dickinson had.
So he's the penman of the founding. What's his relationship to the Declaration of Independence?
Well, I guess I would say that if Dickinson had been in favor of the Declaration, there's no question he would have written it. I mean, he wrote everything else, and he was known as the person who was the spokesman for the American cause. And if Adams, Adams may have been the second choice, so he says, but Jefferson was kind of unknown at that point, and so anyway. Dickinson was deeply, deeply opposed. And it wasn't that he was opposed to independence per se. He was opposed to the timing and the manner. He thought it could be done peacefully without bloodshed if Americans would just be patient. And in fact, in his speech against the Declaration, for which we have notes, he said a number of things. He predicted a lot of the problems that we had during the critical period that necessitated the Constitution. But really interestingly, he said, "Look, if we just if we just fight a couple of battles and the British have a couple of failed campaigns, they will come to us and they will give us everything that we asked for in the first petition to the king in 1774. Just give it some time. And of course they didn't, and the revolution started. But guess what happened in 1778? After a failed campaign, the British sent the Carlisle Commission to negotiate with the Americans and offered them everything that they had asked for in the first petition to the king. And Dickinson went to meet with them, and he said, at this point, now you should listen to me because I did not want independence, but now I see, and so should you, that we are going to win this thing, and you need to recognize our independence, and short of that, no deal. And so they walked away.
Why did he enlist in the army then, if he was opposed to independence?
Well, so this was kind of a very sort of Quakerly way of behaving. Surprisingly, it seems counterintuitive, but in the Quaker meeting, if the meeting is deciding on a direction to go and not everybody agrees, once the dissenters within the meeting have voiced their concerns, if the sense of the meeting is to go in a different direction, the dissenter has two choices. He can remain steadfast and keep his objection and just, obstruct, or he can remove his objection. If he removes his objection, it is his obligation to do everything in his power to support the direction of the meeting. So that's exactly what Dickinson did. He decided that he knew it was going to go forward. That much was clear. And so he abdicated his seat and did not vote because he would have had to vote no. So he wanted it to be unanimous. So he withdrew. He did not attend the meeting where they voted. And so there was no vote from him. But then he had already raised a battalion, and so he had at one point in 1775 he was not only the holder of all of the political power in most of the political power in the colonies. He also controlled, even though he was only a colonel, he controlled the whole Pennsylvania militia, which was one of the largest militias in the colonies. And so he was really the most powerful man in America in 1775. And so he joined his battalion and he deployed to New Jersey to meet the British.
So after we secure independence,
and we should also note that he also then, after his commission as a colonel was over, he then joined the Delaware militia as a private.
I mean, it's insane that nobody had written a book about this guy, right? So their loss is your gate, I suppose. So he holds so many offices after independence. Was Dickinson a man of ambition?
No. In fact, he tried every chance he got to get out of service. In fact, when he was unanimously elected to be president of Delaware, the only dissenting vote was his. and there's this hilarious letter that he wrote to his wife where he was like, they've unanimously elected me president of the state, and I don't know how to get out of this. I don't want to do this. But then he went and he served until he was elected president of Pennsylvania at the same time he was president of Delaware. And so no, he did not have ambitions to serve. He had, when he was a young man, he had ambitions for fame, but then once he got it, he realized very quickly that he didn't want it, that it was too much. He did not like being a celebrity. But in fact, also, another thing about him was that as his fame and celebrity grew, and more people started looking to him, the more he retreated and started to do things behind the scenes and give other people credit for it. And so that's one reason very few people know about all the things he did, was because he was doing things behind the scenes and stepping back and letting things go forward apparently without a leader, when he was like the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. And he also was probably the greatest philanthropist of the early republic. And I was only able to find some things because he did a lot of it in secret. And he was one of the wealthiest men in the country, and he kind of went back and forth. Well, these things should be done in secret, but it's also good if there's an example. But a lot of it was done in secret. So yeah, no, he was not. He didn't write a memoir. He didn't collect his own papers. He just didn't want that limelight.
Yeah, he doesn't have Jefferson's
No.
duplicating device to make sure everyone has a copy of his letters.
No.
We have drafts of that he wrote of the Articles of Confederation. Did those see the light of day, or what happened with his efforts there?
Right. So in June '76, Congress established three really vital committees in preparation for independence. One was the Committee for the Declaration, which obviously Dickinson was not on. Another one was the Committee for the Articles of Confederation, which Dickinson served on and was the primary draftsman of that document. And then also the Committee for the Plan of Treaties, and that was a model treaty that was to form the basis of American foreign policy. Everyone thinks that John Adams wrote that, but actually I found an earlier draft in Dickinson's hand, so oops. And Adams took credit for it, of course. It's mind-blowing. So Dickinson drafted this document, and he took a lot of care to put in place provisions that would protect against many of the things we were about to experience, and a provision for to protect religious liberty, a provision to keep the state subordinate to the central government, various things like that. And most of what he put in there did not even make it out of the committee, and then it was all more or less excised, and then the version that was rewritten and then ratified in 1781 bears very little resemblance to the draft that he wrote. And then, of course, he was voted chairman of the Annapolis Convention to amend the Articles. 20 years after he wrote the initial draft. So yeah.
Did he rub it in their faces?
Probably not. Knowing him, he probably should have, but I don't think so.
So with you mentioned that he was a philanthropist. Maybe tell us a little bit about what his philanthropy was, and also maybe where he got the money to do the philanthropy.
Right. So he was, as I said, I don't know how we would determine these things. I'm not an economic or financial historian, but I have to think he was one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest man in early America. So his father was very wealthy. Some of the wealth was from slave labor, but his father also acquired a lot of property for tenant farms, and they were mostly white tenants. But then Dickinson made an unusual amount of money as an attorney. Most colonial lawyers did not get wealthy because they just mostly prosecuted small debts and did wills and things like that. But Dickinson did a lot of work in the Court of Admiralty with lucrative prize cases, and so he made a lot of money as an attorney. And then he also followed in his father's footsteps of acquiring lots and lots of land, acres and acres, and then rented it out. And he was very frugal. He and his wife, they lived well, but very frugally, and he was not a spendthrift like Jefferson, and so he just had lots of disposable income, and his areas of philanthropy were mainly for poor people, widows and orphans, veterans. He was an abolitionist. He freed all of the people that he enslaved. By 1786, they were all free, but he continued to take care of the older slaves, especially the widows, to make sure that they had houses to live in and clothes to wear and food to eat. But then he gave to learned societies, medical societies. He gave to establish new religions like Methodism. Dickinson was a big founder of the early Methodists, or funder of the early Methodists. But so I guess if there were like the one really big concern that he and his wife shared. And they were really partners in philanthropy. Their big concern was civic education, and he founded numerous schools, two of which survive today. One is Dickinson College, which Benjamin Rush founded in his name. He gave 600 acres and a whole library's worth of books. But I think he kind of backed away from it, and I think it was because the mission was less about civic education and more about useful knowledge, and I think he wanted a more of a civic ed focus. And then the other school was Westtown Friends, which was a Quaker boarding school for poor children and orphans, and so that still survives and flourishes today. But there were numerous other schools. I found numerous ones, and what I think is so fascinating and appropriate for this particular group is that, whereas most educators and anyone who is funding education, they believe that poor children should be taught trades, and that they were not capable of understanding higher order things and learning. Dickinson disagreed, and even for poor children, he wanted them all to learn classical languages so they could read the works in the originals. Astounding. I don't know of anyone else who was advocating that. And so they could be good citizens. And even though there were still property requirements for voting, I think he anticipated a day when all people, and not just white, but also black and maybe even women, I don't know that for sure, would have the vote. And so they all should have classical educations.
What were his thoughts on the Constitution as well as its ratification? Was he ever invited to write the Federalist Papers?
Well, he wouldn't have been, because the Federalist Papers were particularly for New York,
right.
And they didn't circulate beyond New York. They are very famous today, but they were not famous in their own day, and they also were unsuccessful. But Dickinson did write a series of letters, 9 letters under the pen name Fabius. And they were geared towards an audience of ordinary Americans, and he reiterated the same plea that he made in the farmers' letters, which is basically what concerns all should be considered by all, and anyone who does not join in, they have not just a right but a duty to contribute to public debates. And so he wrote these 9 letters. They are much more readable in some ways than the Federalist Papers because they're geared towards a popular audience. They're also deeply, suffused with religion. At that phase in his life, he actually late in life became known more as a theologian than a politician. And so he wrote those 9 letters, and they got praise. They were published around the states and got praise from people like George Washington.
I mean, it's odd that he becomes associated with theology, given. Was he a Republican, and what were his thoughts on the French Revolution?
Well, that's a great question because he was, yes, a Democratic Republican, a supporter of Jefferson, right. And in spite of them being just really polar opposite personality types, and Dickinson an abolitionist and Jefferson inveterate slave owner, but Dickinson was a staunch supporter of the French Revolution, and one might ask, well, why the French Revolution and not the American Revolution? Well, the answer is pretty simple. In America, we had a functional constitution. The British Constitution was functional, and there were remedies for what ailed us. The French didn't have anything like that. And so he really saw the French people as being attacked by their own government. And so, lawfulness of defensive war. So, he certainly regretted the extremes, the terror in that, but he believed that it was a righteous war.
So what do you think is on the agenda for studying Dickinson? We've kind of laid a good groundwork with this wonderful book. It's won the Storing Prize. So what should young, enterprising scholars consider as a future topic? Hand out dissertations right now. Let's go.
Well, I mean, really, in fact, I've been meaning to write up just such a list of topics and put them on the web page. So my web page and the web page for the John Dickinson Writings Project, so that people have some ideas. There are so many topics, and I'm trying to make those possible by publishing the complete writings and selected correspondence of John Dickinson. And I will say that we are in a funding gap. The sort of far left reviewers under the previous administration defunded us. So we are about to finish volume 5, which takes us up through mid 1774, and after that, we might end if we don't get funding. So that will put a stop to the scholarship, because his papers are they're illegible. They're illegible. That's why no one has done them before. It requires paleographers, 18th century handwriting, to read them, and then PhDs to annotate them. They are extremely challenging. I wish I had brought my slides to show some of the. You'd laugh, but there are so many topics. So many of the topics in this book. As I was trying to write the book, I realized that not only had no one explored Dickinson, but a lot of the topics just hadn't been written about at all. Like the 1779 Congress that was so dysfunctional, and Dickinson sat in on, that would be a fruitful topic. Let's see, the whole, the Logan Act, right? That was named for George Logan, who went, and I can't say he went at Dickinson's behest to France, but Dickinson knew about it and probably encouraged him. So George Logan went to France to try to, prevent war with France, and when he came back, Congress passed the Logan Act to say, don't do that. So that there's a topic in there. But really the biography, all you have to do is look and see like where there are so few citations. It's because there were no secondary sources. And so I was doing a lot of this just from scratch. And so there are mistakes. I know there are mistakes. But it's a first draft in a way, right? Of his life. Now there are, to be fair, there are 3 earlier biographies of Dickinson. One is from 1895, I believe. And it's not bad for the time, but it's not especially readable for today. Then one was in 1983, and it's very inaccurate and not very readable. And then one was from 2013, and it's inaccurate. It's more readable and more charitable, but it's also not accurate. And so there will be mistakes, but at least it's on the whole it's accurate. But on the independence of the judiciary, on the Wyoming controversy, which was a civil war between Connecticut and Pennsylvania that Dickinson stopped. There could be more on the mutiny of 1783, which was sort of fomented by Alexander Hamilton, and it was like the Newburgh conspiracy that Washington put down, except it was more dramatic and more volatile. And just so many things. His presidency of either Pennsylvania or Delaware, because almost nothing has been written on those. Just so many topics about his wife and about his female relatives. I mean, when he got married, this cracks me up. It's hilarious. First of all, he proposed to his wife. They were engaged, but then when he wouldn't get married in a Quaker ceremony, and then tried to lecture her on why it wasn't necessary, she dumped his butt and made him the most miserable man on earth. And then ended up coming around after her beloved sister died. But when he married her, her name, she went by Polly. When he married Polly, he just moved in with her to her father's estate, where she had been living with all female relatives in a little Quaker poet society. He just moved in into the sorority and lived there with these poets, and there's a whole something in there, so yeah, it's just so unexpected. Yeah. So many things. And even my husband, oh bless his heart, he just I don't know how he's stuck with me all these years. But he read the manuscript and he walked into my office after he read it. And he's like, damn, Dickinson was everywhere. I'm like, I know. I mean, I just didn't even know myself. So yeah, it's just a cornucopia of topics.
Just one last insult to Adams would be to also make an HBO miniseries after Dickinson. There's no sorority scenes in that one from what I remember. No. Josh, do we have time for Q&A? All right, so what's that? Oh, okay, well, they're silencing me, which is probably a good idea.
Okay, so obviously these counterfactuals are impossible, but I was so fascinated to hear that he thought that there could be a peaceful resolution with patience. Is that something that historians have scholars considered that and wondered about the prudence of, or have you thought about whether that was possible?
Well, okay, so I would say by and large, no. Historians have not considered it, and I mean, it's really actually quite disappointing how teleological our leading historians have been in that they, like the general public, they assumed that the revolution was a foregone conclusion, and they just, what was going to happen, and of course it was, and there was no possibility. But look, if you look at the facts, the Stamp Act was repealed. All of the Townsend Acts were repealed except for when they reissued the Tea Act, and so why couldn't we have, if they had followed Dickinson's plan? I mean, I know that some very powerful historians will scoff at what I'm saying, and they do. That they'll say, oh, well, the colonies were effectively independent by 1774, which I think is nonsense. But, if they had followed Dickinson's course and there would have been war. I mean, that had already started, right? But independence, I mean, I think the fact of the Carlisle Commission proves that Dickinson was right, and that, if they had just been patient, fought their war, absolutely, and not back down from that, but they could have gotten everything that they wanted. It's hard to be patient. And they had no experience with that kind of thing. And really, the two modes that Americans had access to, the two modes of resistance were Toryism on the one hand, which basically divine right of kings. What do? You kind of hunker down and you take whatever the king has to offer, and you're grateful. On the one hand, on the other hand, you have the Puritan/Whig theory of revolution, which basically says if there's tyranny, the people have the right to overthrow the government and start anew. So the Quaker way was very little known and did not really become widely known until Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, which is it's an exact statement of the Quaker theory of civil disobedience that was encouraged by Quakers, and the Quakers published the first 50,000 copies of it. It's a Quaker theory. And so there's still, I mean, a lot of Americans today still do not understand what civil disobedience is. So we're still having to relearn the lessons that Dickinson tried to teach. So I think it was possible. He wasn't just this crazy, out of touch, person that he's been portrayed. He was an extraordinarily astute observer of human behavior. He was a master strategist. He was a tactician. The things that he was able to do kind of behind the scenes it's a good thing he was a good person, because he could have done some real mischief. He could be very conniving for good ends. I don't think he should be. He should be shortchanged.
So I got to know, what was the result of the duel? I'm assuming he won because you got a whole book's worth, but how did that go down?
So actually, Galloway ignored the challenge, which the really funny part, though, is that Dickinson then proceeded to write these pamphlets and broadsides excoriating Galloway and ridiculing him and mocking him for declining the challenge. And so, I mean, that's kind of the funny part. And, I mean, you know, I can only think that in retrospect, Dickinson was mortified that he had been so rash. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for presenting your book to us, and congratulations on your award. And so I just had a question to you about some Quaker political theory. So it's clear to me, as you were talking, I was a little surprised by this, but, you know, Mr. Dickinson's support of the French Revolution was clearly very misguided. And, you know, Quakers in any century have never been accused of being political or religious conservatives. So I suppose my question is, in what ways has Quaker social theory or Quaker political thought been detrimental to the American founding?
Well, so I would say not just the founding, but I think maybe more broadly. Yeah. So, and this was a problem with Quakerism from the earliest years and persists until now, and what I saw in college. So, Quakerism is mistaken for an extremely individualistic faith. People tend to think in terms of, and this is the mistaken part, of my inner light. That's really, really wrong. God's light is God's light in individuals, but it's the same light. And so it cannot be understood in isolation. And so, but that is a mistake that has been present since the beginning of Quakerism. And Quakers used to complain that there are a lot of people who attend Quaker meeting, and they, you know, basically are not interested. They like the certain tenets that liberate them from social norms and practices and hierarchy and all that stuff, but they're not interested in bearing the cross of membership. And so that's the kind of individualism that Tocqueville noticed and criticized. And I think, you know, it's now a perennial fact of American life that Americans on both sides of the aisle are much more interested in the individual than in the communal project. I'd stay here all night. This is the fun part. Yeah.
Real simple one, because I haven't quite caught it yet. So there was a period of time where Dickinson regularly attended Quaker meetings, and it was 10 years, 20 years, a year.
So we don't know.
Yeah.
There are really no records from his childhood.
Yeah.
I think he attended as a young man. I don't know.
Not with his family, though. They were not.
No, they were.
His parents?
His parents were both Quakers.
Okay, I missed that.
His father became alienated from the meeting, but his mother never was alienated. And so I think his father probably stopped attending. I assume that he attended with his mother and his brother. And then I don't know when he was sort of in his heyday as a young man. I don't know. But then after he got married and really became, took a turn towards Quakerism circa, 1777, then he did attend meeting at least once and usually more times a week for the remainder of his life.
Oh, so he was never a practicing churchman in another denomination, despite his support for
So
Methodism,
he dressed like a Quaker. He spoke using thee and thou like a Quaker. He used the numerical dates instead of the pagan months and days of the week. He looked like a Quaker in every way, sounded like a Quaker, attended meeting, and he had Quakers pressuring him, please be a Quaker. And no, he just never would. And he's buried in Wilmington Friends burial ground. He still looks very much like a Quaker.
Please join me in congratulating Jane Calvert. We have this beautiful trophy. Can't think of the word statue. We gave you an entire statue for this award. So thank you so much. This has been a great day, a great way to end day one of the 2026 Ciceronian Society Conference. And we're not done. We still got, the bar is open, and you have 2 drink tickets in the back of your name badge, which are good for any drink over there. If you're underage, you can still use them for non-alcoholic beverages. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow morning for morning prayer and some breakout sessions.
You have been listening to The Sower, a production of the Ciceronian Society. To learn more about us, our programs, and to sign up for our newsletter, please visit ciceroniansociety.org.